I've been asked recently by someone whether or not I work and how self-sustainable or autonomous am I, and whether or not I think there are disadvantages in the future for our children by living this autonomous lifestyle, and what are my thoughts on that. And I'm going to have to break this into a couple of videos, I think, because there's so much to go into and I don't want to make a long video. I'll try and keep it on topic and in the right subject, so to speak. But as a little overview, I think I'll talk about my situation, why I'm the way I am, and it's got to do with financial autonomy, because it is an important part of it, especially when you're trying to get out of the system. You need funding, you need finances, you have to pay we're born into debt, so you have to pay your way out, unfortunately. Unless you're lucky enough to have an extremely wealthy family that's either got enough land that you can live off, which is what I'm trying to do for my children, get to a point where they've got everything that they need as a base for survival, and then they can work up from there, whatever they want to do, expand as per how they need to expand. So I'll explain my situation and where I'm at with the financial, without going into too much detail, obviously. But I think as far as what we can think to aim for and strive towards, and how we can foresee some potential problems with this kind of lifestyle and achieving this autonomous, self-reliant, red-pilled pagan community, the hardest thing is going to be getting land. I think if we look at the Amish have got a fairly good model. You know, I think they've got a pretty good lifestyle, aside from the religious retardation. They do pretty well for themselves. They look after each other. They produce most of their own stuff, if not all of it, from what I understand. I'm no expert on the Amish. I assume a lot about them. But what I understand, I think they've got something to strive for. They're centuries ahead of us because they are already a built-up community. They already have lands and they already have infrastructure for their survival. So we're significantly disadvantaged compared to the Amish. But I think we can also look to see where some of the problems in the future might arise. Like, think about how their children are tempted by the outside world and things like that. You know, the temptations of degeneracy in many ways. The way they live somewhat secluded, I think, is a good thing. But I think when you hide things away from your children, you also you create that temptation. Now, we don't have Amish here in Australia. We have something similar called the exclusive brethren. Similar type of people. I've had a fair bit to do with these people over the years. I haven't had anything to do with them for a while now, but this is probably the closest thing I've come to know to the brethren. And one of the greatest problems I noticed with them, they had a lot of alcoholism in their community, but the way they interacted with the outside world was pretty good for the most part. Obviously, no community or no people are perfect. Strive for perfection, and that's about as best as we can do. But they were autonomous. You know, they had their own farms, they had their own construction companies, they had their own. They used tech minimally, but they still used it. They had little quirks where they would they'd have phones because they needed phones to interact with the outside world, but they didn't. They were always behind a little bit. Like when everyone was getting mobile phones, they only sort of started using landline phones. And they wouldn't keep them in their house. They'd have them like right on the boundary of their property. But I think if you're going to use the tech, you don't need to do stupid things like that. Just use it. And if you need if the idea is for moderation and you can't use these things in moderation without leaving it outside of your home, outside your property, you've got other issues. So I think there's other ways around that. But yeah, I think the Amish is something to keep in mind when what we aim for and what we strive for. As for how we get there, there's some different ways to do it. If you've got a family that you can depend on, that you can survive on, where you don't have to pay like a rent or something like that to live with, I certainly advise working and trying to save enough money to buy a property outright. Don't go into debt like me. I'm a debt slave, which is certainly a hindrance to my level of autonomy and food production. The amount of land that I have and the ability that I have to work my land, I can certainly be 100% autonomous with food production specifically. But what restricts me from doing so is my time away from home that must be spent in order to work to pay for my debts. I don't work a full-time job. I'm not a wage slave as such, but I do have to work, and I work a physically demanding job. So for me to pay my way, to pay my debts, it works out that I have to work about 3 to 4 days per week. So about 50 to 60% of my time is dedicated to work, which means it's 50 to 60% of my time that I'm not spending at home working my own land and producing my own food. I still produce a lot of my own food. I'd say probably more than 50%. But because of the physical demand of my job and the fact that I have to be away from my land, it means that my demand for energy is higher because of the physicality of my job. And then also because I'm away, it means I have to supplement my diet with food that is bought, which means I also need to earn more money in order to pay for that food that I'm not producing myself. So it sort of perpetuates itself. This is the perpetual slave and debt system, and it's hard, and this is why it's extremely hard. And in this day and age too, property prices and land prices are through the roof, and they're more expensive than they've ever been. So we've certainly got a hard task in getting our foot out of the system, our foot out the door. But the way that perpetual debt system works, I think most people are sort of aware of this anyway, but I'll explain it quickly. I only need to work 1 day a week in my job doing what I do to pay for my loan on my property. It's only 1 day a week, and I get paid a pretty good rate for what I do, but because of the nature of my work and what I need to do, I also need to pay for things like a vehicle to travel to work. I need to fuel the vehicle. I need to keep it registered. I need to maintain it and all this kind of thing. I need to pay for tools. I need to maintain tools and replace tools. So what that now means is I have to work a second day every week in order to pay for the things I need to do my job. So my demand for income goes up. So I can't just pay my minimum debt, unfortunately. I could do something else for work where I don't have so much financial requirements, but of course I'd earn a lot less. There's a balance to be found in all this. I probably wouldn't work a full-time job. If I didn't do the job I did now, I still wouldn't work a full-time job because it's the cost of working, and the more time you spend dedicated to a job, the more time you spend out of your nature, which means you're going to accrue extra expenses one way or another, whether it be through some sort of medication, whether it be pharmaceutical or drugs and alcohol, or some sort of means for cope to deal with your unnatural lifestyle. And this is what most people have, which is why most people remain slaves for the rest of their life. They work a full-time job and they get stressed and they hate it and they don't understand why, so then they go and medicate themselves in the evening, whether it be through drugs and alcohol or even just television, just to sort of numb themselves from their reality, and then they get caught in this trap and they never get out. I've found that the sweet spot is 3 days, no more than 4. If you spend more than 4 days of your week working, you're going to suffer greatly from the institutionalized worker mentality. So yeah, I work 3 days, sometimes 4. But as I said, I only need to do 1 day to get where I've got to be, but I've got to work another day to pay for my ability to do the job. And then because of my time away from my property, not producing food and my higher energy demand due to my high physicality and physical nature of my job, I also need to intake more food to spend doing my job, which means I need to pay for even more food again, which works out to be the 3rd day that I work out of the week. So I have to work 3 days out of my week to pay my way. So 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door. Then of course I've got to pay for the privilege of earning money. Because I earn a significant amount of money now, I have to then pay tax on that. So that's where the fourth day every other week sort of comes in. So in that respect, how much I'm dependent on earning money, that's how I measure my level of autonomy. Not by how much I'm actually producing, but how much I need to depend on the financial system. So I'd say I'm about 50-50 right now. But if I didn't have debt, I would without a doubt be 100% self-sufficient. Without a doubt. For me and my whole family. You've got to have the right amount of land to support the right amount of people, of course. You're not going to feed 100 people on 10 square metres. And if you've got too much land, of course, for how many people you've got contributing, you're going to struggle to maintain it, and you've got to actually be able to pay for that. So if the land is, an endless size, you've got to work out how am I actually going to pay for that. So you've got to work up in the right balance. But I'll leave that there for now. I'll go into some more details about what I have planned for my children and their future, their education and things like that in another video. I think that makes sense as a standalone video, but yeah, I'd like to go into more detail in another one. So until then,